the NYPD, if they have a serious staff shortage, then I would work with them to figure out how we remedy that. But the NYPD is something like 30,000 employees. There is no replacing 30,000 employees.
I'm Julie Pace, Washington Bureau Chief for the Associated Press. And this is Ground Game. The coronavirus pandemic ranks among one of the most consequential stories ever covered by the Associated Press in its 170-year history. Here to take you inside the outbreak is AP's Ralph Russo.
From the Associated Press, this is Inside the Outbreak. I'm Ralph Russo. Today is Tuesday, April 7th. In the last 24 hours, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson was moved into intensive care to be treated for COVID-19, and Japan's Prime Minister had declared a state of emergency for Tokyo to protect the world's oldest population from the virus. Here in the United States, while public officials at all levels of government are preparing citizens for what could be the deadliest period of the pandemic, there are also statistical signs of a slowing spread. Today on Inside the Outbreak, we look at the impact the outbreak has had on law enforcement. My guests will be AP reporters Colleen Long and Mike Balsamo. Colleen and Mike have written stories about the types of crimes that have sprung up during the outbreak and how prisons are trying to manage the virus despite little preparation for this scenario. Plus, what happens when an area's police force is crippled by the sickness or it snarls the court system. Colleen Long leads the AP's national law enforcement coverage team, and Mike Balsamo is the AP's lead Justice Department and law enforcement reporter. Thank you both for joining me today here on Inside the Outbreak.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
So let's start off this interview by talking about crime. There are some numbers. In fact, I think there was a report out today that suggests that violent crime and crime in general is down here in New York City, where I am, and really across the country. But the coronavirus outbreak has spawned some opportunities for fraud and been the catalyst for some other violent crimes. Can you give me a description of what kind of crimes are spreading with the virus?
Yeah, Ralph. So as you said, sort of traditional crime is down. Burglaries, robberies, murder, that type of crime we're not seeing so much as people are confined, to their homes and to spaces right around their homes. But we're seeing a rise of other we've been calling it coronavirus crime. That includes hate crimes. The Anti-Defamation League, which tracks hate crimes sort of nationwide, has said they've seen a really large increase in racist comments, blaming the virus on certain ethnic groups and attacks leveled at those groups. And we also have seen a lot of scams related to the coronavirus, ranging from money scams where people are told if they give a bunch of money, they can save a sick relative, to people hawking fake cures. And one guy in Maryland was apparently going to people's homes in a vest, knocking on doors and telling him that he was there to inspect for coronavirus. I think Mike can talk a little bit about what the Justice Department is doing as it relates to scams.
Yeah, the Justice Department has created kind of a new task force. They're looking really hard into scams, and they've activated this nationwide hotline basically to collaborate all the federal agencies into being able to receive all of these tips at once. So the DOJ has seen kind of an uptick in scams. They brought a couple of cases of people who are selling fake cures, and the Attorney General has sent a couple of memos to U.S. attorneys across the country telling them they really need to kind of prioritize these prosecutions. The federal government really making clear that they really want to go after people who are trying to capitalize on this.
Yeah, and the World Health Organization, too, is trying to combat the idea of fake cures, too. There are things going around where silver, bleach, and garlic could protect you against coronavirus, like you're being protected against vampires. And bananas can prevent it. So the World Health Organization is also kind of working double time to try to tell people that obviously these do not will not save you from the virus.
So let's turn our attention to the prison system. And Mike, you've done some exclusive reporting about the preparedness or lack thereof for handling an outbreak inside a facility. What difficulties have corrections officers faced?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, an outbreak in prisons is something that health officials have been warning about for years, right? The potential of spreading a virus very quickly behind bars is something that's very real. These are people who are all kind of confined together. You're living with complete strangers, kind of just feet from toilets. You go to, eat together, and we're starting to kind of see that happen at some facilities. So, we focused a lot on the Federal Bureau of Prisons, where there are 175,000 federal inmates behind bars. And we've seen real concerns from correction officers there across the country that personal protective equipment is scarce. Some officers are saying masks are so scarce that they've had to go out and buy their own. Some were told they can't wear them. We know at one facility in New York, staff members told us there was no soap. Other officers have said there's no hand sanitizer at some of these places. And we've heard from prisoners now that they're starting to make masks part of kind of their job duties from, some of these prison industry jobs.
So how can the prisons protect the inmates, or are they trying to protect the inmates?
Yeah, so I mean, there's kind of two schools of thought here on this, right? One is that, behind bars, it might be easier to contain the spread of a virus like coronavirus because you can kind of isolate people as soon as you start to see symptoms. But advocates and congressional leaders for weeks have been calling on the Justice Department to kind of just do more to release high-risk prisoners, something that we've seen happen a little bit on a local level in New York and Los Angeles. And the Attorney General has issued a memo ordering the Bureau of Prisons to kind of identify inmates who may be at a higher risk for contracting coronavirus and then review if they can be released to home confinement. But we have seen some larger outbreaks at different facilities across the country so far. But BOP said, as of yesterday, I believe it's something like 560 inmates have been released to home confinement.
But there's also a really big push by more conservative-leaning lawmakers not to release prisoners from prison. Bail reform right now is a really big issue in a lot of different areas across the country. And there's pushback from lawmakers on how many people should actually be released as the epidemic grows.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that they're trying to find that kind of right balance. The Attorney General issued another memo yesterday telling U.S. attorneys maybe they shouldn't seek detention for pretrial detainees at the same rate that they normally would given coronavirus. But the memo was very clear that the Justice Department doesn't want to release anyone who they think may be violent back onto the streets.
So we talked about how crime is down, but there is still crime and there's still police officers needed to fight that crime. What happens to a police force when the coronavirus strikes?
So the NYPD, which is the nation's largest police department, it has 36,000 uniformed officers. Right now is hitting this head on. Nearly 1 in 5 police officers are off sick. I think 2,200 officers are confirmed to have the virus. 1 detective and a dozen civilian employees have died from it. So the department is large enough that the commissioner is saying they don't need to bring in any reinforcements or anything yet. But in other smaller departments, like, for example, in Detroit, where the police chief himself has come down with the virus, those officers are doing, 12-hour shifts. They're coming in and getting their temperatures taken before they go out on for patrol. In Detroit, which has, I think, 2,200 officers, 1 in 5 are quarantined right now. So that's making a big dent in policing in a smaller city like Detroit. The other thing is police officers sort of nationwide are shifting a little bit to do more policing related to social distancing. New York City yesterday raised the fine from $500 to $1,000 if people are violating the stay-at-home orders because they saw an influx of people hanging out in the parks over the weekend. So, officers are going around to bars and to common spaces and basically telling people to disperse. They're doing that in Washington, D.C. too, where officers are basically telling people with toddlers that they have to maintain social distance so that the kids are not too close together. I saw that yesterday. It was not my toddler. Yeah, I mean, I just think the way that the police departments are operating right now is sort of having to change as their officers are increasingly falling sick, also sort of changing how they're operating from an anti-crime perspective.
So as much of life has ground to a halt by the stay-at-home orders, which we just referenced, used to stop the spread of the disease, how is the shutdown impacting our courts?
So the court system right now is sort of on halt. It's in a standstill. A lot of courts across the country are delaying hearings, delaying trials, and that means a couple things. People are staying in prison longer because they're not getting out for trial and they're not being able to have bail hearings. And also with the court system, it's tricky because we don't really know what the impact is going to be until the courts open again. And it could be that your right as an American to a speedy trial, for example, is sort of put on the back burner because we have such a giant national backlog of cases that haven't been heard over the past couple of months. Mike, do you know anything about what's happening in federal court system?
Yeah, so some of these cases are continuing. I know in the Eastern District of New York, in Brooklyn, some of these cases are going on, and there are teleconference hearings where basically everyone is just calling in on the phone. In the state courts in New York, that's very similar to what they're doing. They're starting to arraign people via video feed, something that we had basically never seen in New York, with the exception of, people who were having hospital arraignments. But now judges are doing that from home. They're just logging in from their computer. Defendants are still seen in jail, and then they're arraigned completely virtually. And in other places, there are requests to kind of amend the Speedy Trial Act, which would mean that there would be a longer time period, or there could be a longer time period in which your trial could continue. So basically they're asking other judges, higher judges, to kind of amend the rules in order to deal with the outbreak.
And then you have like the high profile prisoners trying to get themselves out of prison in order to stay safe from the coronavirus. So they're arguing that the court system is making their lives more difficult because they're trapped in prison when they can't get a speedy trial. So that's the possibility too.
Colleen Long leads the AP law enforcement coverage team, and Mike Balsamo is the AP's lead Justice Department and law enforcement reporter. Thank you very much today for your insight, folks. Stay safe and healthy.
Thanks, you too.
Thanks for having us.
That's it for this episode of Ground Game. We'll be here every step of the way during this extraordinary moment in American politics and American life, giving you all the news you need to know. Be sure to tell a friend about us, and please subscribe on Apple Podcasts and leave us a review. Some of the details of our discussion may have changed by the time you hear this. For up-to-date developments on all of your news, head over to apnews.com. From the Westwood One Podcast Network.